What happens when one of Hollywood's most beloved stars walks onto a talk show stage expecting a friendly conversation, only to face an ambush of disrespect and condescension that forces him to make a stand? In just 34 seconds of one cutting remark, a host's smug superiority would trigger an explosion that ended the interview in the most dramatic fashion imaginable. Jamie Foxx arrived at the studio that evening with nothing but good intentions. He'd been making the rounds promoting his latest project, charming audiences on every stop, spreading positivity and laughter wherever he went. The talk show appearance was supposed to be another easy conversation, another chance to connect with fans and share some stories. But Bill Maher had other plans. From the moment Jamie walked out to polite applause, something felt different. The energy in the room was strange, almost tense. Bill greeted him with a handshake that seemed forced, a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. They sat down, and the cameras started rolling. "So, Jamie," Bill began, leaning back in his chair with an air of superiority that immediately set an uncomfortable tone. "You've been everywhere lately. Every show, every podcast, every platform. Must be exhausting trying to stay relevant." Jamie laughed it off, ever the professional. "You know, I just love what I do, man. I love connecting with people, sharing stories. It's a blessing to still be working after all these years." "A blessing," Bill repeated, his voice dripping with mockery. "That's one way to put it. Some might call it desperate." The audience went quiet. You could feel the shift in the room, the collective intake of breath as people realized this wasn't going to be a normal interview. Jamie's smile faltered for just a second, but he recovered quickly. "Desperate? Nah, I wouldn't say that. I'm just grateful for the opportunities, you know?" Bill wasn't letting up. He leaned forward now, his eyes narrowing. "Come on, Jamie. Let's be real here. You're not exactly the powerhouse you used to be. The Oscar was what? Years ago? Since then, it's been mostly forgettable roles and straight to streaming movies. Don't you ever wonder if your time has passed?" Jamie's jaw tightened. The crew behind the cameras exchanged uncomfortable glances. This was supposed to be a light, fun interview. Nobody expected Bill to come out swinging like this. "My time hasn't passed," Jamie said, his voice calm but with an edge to it now. "I'm still working, still creating, still doing what I love. I don't measure my worth by your standards." "My standards?" Bill laughed, a harsh sound that echoed through the studio. "I'm talking about industry standards. Box office numbers. Critical acclaim. You used to have those things. Now you're just another celebrity trying to hang on." The audience was completely silent now. Some people looked shocked. Others looked angry on Jamie's behalf. This wasn't entertainment anymore. This was an attack. Jamie took a deep breath, clearly trying to maintain his composure. "Bill, I came here tonight to have a conversation. Maybe make people laugh. Talk about my work. I don't know why you're coming at me like this." "I'm coming at you with honesty," Bill shot back. "Something you probably don't get much of anymore, surrounded by yes men and people who are afraid to tell you the truth. You're coasting, Jamie. You're living off past glory." "Past glory?" Jamie's voice rose slightly. "Man, I've been working nonstop. I've been putting in the work, doing my thing. Just because you don't see it or value it doesn't mean it's not happening." Bill waved his hand dismissively. "Oh, please. You're doing talk shows and podcasts because that's all you have left. The serious work, the important work, that's dried up. And instead of accepting it with some dignity, you're out here clinging to fame like it's a life raft." That was when Jamie's expression changed. The friendliness was gone, replaced by something harder, more serious. He sat up straighter in his chair. "You don't know anything about my life or my work," Jamie said, his voice low and controlled. "You sit here in your studio, behind your desk, talking down to people, thinking you're some kind of authority on everyone's career. But you're not." Bill smirked. I'm just calling it like I see it. No, Jamie interrupted. You're being disrespectful. There's a difference between honesty and just being cruel for the sake of it. And right now, you're crossing a line. The audience murmured in agreement. People were nodding, some even clapping softly. Bill's smirk faded slightly, but he pressed on. Crossing a line? This is my show, Jamie. I ask the questions I want to ask. If you can't handle some real talk, maybe you shouldn't be doing interviews. Real talk? Jamie leaned forward now, matching Bill's energy. Real talk would be having an actual conversation. What you're doing is trying to tear me down for your own entertainment. That's not journalism. That's not even good television. That's just sad. Bill's face reddened. He wasn't used to guests pushing back like this. Most people who came on his show either agreed with him or stayed quiet when he went on his rants. But Jamie wasn't backing down. Don't lecture me about good television, Bill snapped. I've been doing this for decades. I've interviewed presidents, world leaders, the biggest names in entertainment, and I've always told the truth, even when people didn't want to hear it. The truth? Jamie shook his head. Man, you're not telling the truth. You're giving your opinion and acting like it's fact. There's a difference. And your opinion about me and my career? I don't care about it. I really don't. The audience erupted in applause. Bill looked genuinely surprised, then angry. He wasn't in control of this conversation anymore, and he knew it. You don't care. Bill's voice was sharp now. Then why are you here? Why did you agree to come on my show if you don't care what I think? I came here because I was told this would be a conversation, Jamie explained. I was told we'd talk about my work, maybe have some laughs, connect with the audience. Nobody told me I was walking into an ambush. Nobody told me you were going to spend the whole time trying to make me feel small. I'm not trying to make you feel small, Bill protested. I'm trying to have a real conversation. If that makes you uncomfortable, that's your problem. It doesn't make me uncomfortable, Jamie said firmly. It makes me disappointed. I'm disappointed that someone with your platform, with your reach, chooses to use it like this. To put people down, to mock them, to make them feel less than. That's not what good interviewers do. That's what bullies do. The word hung in the air. Bully. Several audience members gasped. Bill's face went from red to almost purple. How dare you, Bill sputtered. I'm not a bully. I'm a truth teller. If you can't handle that, that's not my fault. Truth teller, Jamie repeated, his tone making it clear what he thought of that claim. You keep saying that, but all I've heard tonight is you putting me down, questioning my worth, dismissing my work. That's not truth. That's just mean-spirited nonsense. Bill stood up suddenly, his chair rolling backward. You know what? If you're so offended by my questions, maybe you should leave. The audience gasped again. This was unprecedented. Hosts didn't kick guests off their shows, especially not guests as beloved as Jamie Foxx. But Bill was too angry now to think clearly. Jamie stayed seated, looking up at Bill with a calm expression that only seemed to make the host angrier. Is that what you want? Jamie asked quietly. You want me to leave? If you're going to sit there and insult me on my own show, then yes, Bill said. I want you to leave. Jamie nodded slowly, then stood up. He was taller than Bill, and as he rose to his full height, it was clear who had the real power in this moment. The audience was completely on his side, watching with rapt attention. You know what, Bill? Jamie said, his voice carrying clearly through the studio. I'll leave. Not because you're kicking me off, but because I have too much respect for myself to sit here and be talked to like this. I don't need this. I don't need your show. I don't need your approval. And I definitely don't need your disrespect. He started removing his microphone, his movements deliberate and unhurried. Bill watched, seeming to realize that this wasn't going the way he'd planned. The audience was murmuring loudly now, many people clearly upset. Jamie, wait, Bill said, but his tone was still defensive, still argumentative. Don't be so sensitive. This is just how I do interviews. Jamie paused, microphone in hand, and looked directly at Bill. Then maybe you need to change how you do interviews. Because this, he gestured between them, this isn't okay. You don't get to treat people like this and call it entertainment. I treat everyone the same way, Bill argued. I ask tough questions. That's my job. No, Jamie corrected him. Your job is to interview people, to draw out interesting stories, to create something worth watching. What you did tonight wasn't tough questions. It was a personal attack, and I'm not going to stand for it. Bill's producer was rushing onto the stage now, clearly trying to salvage the situation, but it was too late. Jamie had already handed his microphone to a crew member and was walking toward the exit. This is ridiculous, Bill called after him. You're being ridiculous. Jamie stopped at the edge of the stage and turned back one last time. You know what's ridiculous? That you still don't get it. You still don't understand why what you did was wrong. And that's sad, Bill. That's really sad. The audience erupted in applause as Jamie walked off the stage. People were standing now, giving him a standing ovation as he disappeared backstage. Bill stood there, looking stunned and angry, his face still flushed. Well, Bill said to the audience, trying to regain control, I guess some people can't handle honest conversation. But the audience wasn't having it. People were booing now, actually booing the host on his own show. Some were getting up and leaving. Bill's producer was in his ear, probably telling him to go to commercial, to cut away, to do something to stop the disaster unfolding in front of him. Backstage, Jamie was surrounded by crew members, all of them expressing their support, telling him he did the right thing. He thanked them graciously, still maintaining his composure even as his hands shook slightly from the adrenaline. That was intense, one of the producers said. I'm so sorry. Bill's been difficult lately, but I've never seen him go after a guest like that. Jamie shook his head. It's not your fault, but somebody needs to tell him that's not okay. You can't just attack people and call it an interview. Back on stage, Bill was trying to continue the show, but the energy was completely dead. The audience was barely paying attention, still buzzing about what they'd just witnessed. Several people were recording on their phones, despite the rules against it. This moment was going to be everywhere. In the green room, Jamie was gathering his things. A production assistant came in, looking nervous. Mr. Foxx, Bill wanted me to ask if you'd consider coming back out. He says maybe you both got heated and could talk it through. Jamie looked at her kindly. I appreciate you asking, but no. That wasn't both of us getting heated. That was him attacking me and me standing up for myself. There's nothing to talk through. I said what I needed to say. The assistant nodded, clearly relieved she didn't have to push harder. I understand. And for what it's worth, everyone back here thinks you handled that perfectly. As Jamie left the building, he could hear the show continuing inside, but the damage was done. Bill Maher had crossed a line with the wrong person, and instead of getting the submissive, grateful guest he seemed to expect, he'd gotten someone who knew his worth and wasn't afraid to stand up for it. The conversation between them had started with subtle jabs, evolved into open hostility, and ended with one of the most dramatic walkouts in talk show history. But through it all, Jamie had maintained his dignity, spoken his truth, and refused to be diminished by someone who thought his platform gave him the right to tear others down. What Bill Maher failed to understand that night was that respect isn't something you can demand. It's something you earn through how you treat people. And by treating Jamie Foxx with such obvious contempt, he'd revealed more about his own character than he ever could about his guests. The audience had seen it. The crew had seen it. And now, as word spread about what happened, the whole world would see it too. A host so consumed by his own sense of superiority that he couldn't recognize the difference between provocative questioning and personal attacks. A guest so secure in himself that he could walk away from a major platform rather than tolerate disrespect. In the end, it wasn't really about Jamie Foxx being kicked off the show. Bill could claim that if he wanted, could spin it however made him feel better. But everyone who was there, everyone who saw what actually happened, knew the truth. Jamie hadn't been kicked off. He'd chosen to leave. He'd chosen his self-respect over the opportunity to be on television. He'd chosen dignity over publicity. And that choice, that moment of standing up and walking away, said more about character and integrity than any interview ever could. Bill Maher had his platform, his desk, his studio, his cameras. But in that moment, Jamie Foxx had something far more valuable. He had his self-respect, and he'd shown everyone watching that no platform, no matter how big, is worth sacrificing that for. The questions Bill had asked weren't really questions at all. They were attacks disguised as conversation. The things he'd said weren't insights or observations. They were judgments designed to belittle and diminish. And Jamie had recognized that immediately, had called it out clearly, and had refused to participate in his own degradation. That's what made this moment so powerful. Not the drama of the walkout itself, but what it represented. A refusal to accept mistreatment, just because it comes from someone in a position of power. A willingness to stand up and say, no, this isn't okay, even when it would be easier to just sit there and take it. Bill had probably expected Jamie to laugh off the insults, to play along, to be a good sport about being disrespected on national television. That's what usually happens. Guests come on shows like this and accept whatever treatment they receive because they want the exposure, they need the platform. They're afraid of being seen as difficult. But Jamie Foxx didn't need any of that. He was secure enough in his career, confident enough in his worth, that he could afford to walk away. And more than that, he felt he had to walk away. Because staying would have meant accepting the premise that Bill's behavior was okay, that it was normal, that guests should just tolerate being talked to like that. By leaving, Jamie sent a clear message, not just to Bill Maher, but to every host, every interviewer, every person with a platform who thinks that power gives them the right to be cruel. It doesn't. And when they cross the line, they should be called out for it. The actual words exchanged between them would be analyzed and discussed for days afterward. People would debate who was right, who was wrong, whether Bill's questions were fair, whether Jamie overreacted. But for those who were actually there, for those who saw the whole thing unfold in real time, there was no debate. They'd watched a host abuse his position, and a guest refused to tolerate it. Simple as that. What started as a standard promotional interview had transformed into something much more significant. A moment that captured something important about respect, power, and the courage it takes to stand up for yourself, even when the cameras are rolling, and walking away means making headlines for all the wrong reasons. Jamie had known what would happen. He'd known that leaving would create drama, would generate controversy, would lead to endless speculation and commentary. But he'd done it anyway. Because some things are more important than managing your public image. Some things are more important than avoiding conflict, and self-respect is one of those things. As for Bill, he'd shown his true colors that night. Whatever he'd been trying to achieve with his aggressive questioning, whatever point he'd been trying to make, it had backfired spectacularly. He'd looked small, petty, and mean-spirited. He'd lost control of his own show. And worst of all, he'd been called out in front of his audience, his crew, and eventually the world. Earlier in the interview, before things had completely fallen apart, there had been brief moments where it seemed like the conversation might recover. After one particularly harsh comment from Bill about Jamie's recent film choices, Jamie had tried to steer things in a more positive direction. Look, I know not every project is going to be a critical darling, Jamie had said, maintaining a diplomatic tone. but I choose roles that speak to me, that challenge me as an artist. Isn't that what we're supposed to do? Bill had scoffed at that. An artist? Come on, Jamie. You're doing buddy comedies and action movies. Let's not pretend this is high art we're talking about here. Why does it have to be one or the other? Jamie had responded, his patience clearly wearing thin. Why can't entertainment also have value? Why can't making people laugh or giving them an escape be worthwhile? Because it's not, Bill had stated flatly, as if his opinion was objective fact. It's fluff. It's distraction. It's not the kind of work that matters. That exchange had been a turning point. Up until then, Jamie had been trying to engage in good faith, trying to find common ground, trying to make the interview work. But Bill's absolute dismissal of entire genres of work, his arrogant certainty that only what he valued had merit, had made it clear that no real conversation was possible here. Not the kind of work that matters, Jamie had repeated, shaking his head in disbelief. You know how many people have told me that a movie I made helped them through a tough time. How many messages I get from folks saying they watched something I did with their family and it brought them together. That doesn't matter. Bill had waved his hand dismissively again, that same condescending gesture he'd used throughout the interview. Anecdotal evidence. I'm talking about cultural impact, about work that pushes society forward, that makes people think. Making people feel is just as important as making people think, Jamie had argued. Maybe more important. We need both. We need entertainment. We need escapism. We need joy, especially now. That's a convenient excuse for doing lightweight work, Bill had countered, his tone dripping with contempt. And that was when Jamie's expression had really hardened. That was when the professional courtesy, the media training, the years of experience handling difficult interviews, all of it had hit a wall. Because Bill wasn't just criticizing Jamie's work anymore. He was dismissing the very idea that bringing joy to people had value. And that was something Jamie couldn't let stand. The confrontation between them wasn't just about two personalities clashing. It was about different approaches to communication, different values, different levels of respect for other people. Bill seemed to think that being provocative meant being aggressive, that asking tough questions meant launching personal attacks. Jamie understood that real conversation requires mutual respect, that you can disagree with someone without trying to destroy them. In those minutes on stage, both men revealed who they really were. Bill revealed someone so invested in his own intellectual superiority that he'd forgotten how to treat guests with basic courtesy. Jamie revealed someone with enough self-confidence to recognize disrespect when he saw it, and enough courage to reject it publicly. The back and forth between them had escalated quickly, each exchange raising the temperature a little more. Bill's dismissive comments about Jamie's career, Jamie's calm but firm pushback, Bill's insistence that he was just being honest, Jamie's observation that there's a difference between honesty and cruelty. It had built to an inevitable climax, the moment when Bill tried to assert his authority, by telling Jamie to leave, only to have Jamie reclaim his power by choosing to go on his own terms. That reversal, that shift in power dynamics, was what made the whole thing so compelling to watch. Bill thought he was in control. He thought his position as host gave him ultimate authority over what happened on his stage. But Jamie showed him that real power doesn't come from sitting behind a desk or having your name on the show. Real power comes from knowing your worth and being willing to walk away from anyone who doesn't recognize it. Every word spoken between them that night mattered. Not just what was said, but how it was said. The tone, the body language, the subtle shifts in energy as the conversation deteriorated. Bill's increasing aggression as he realized his guest wasn't going to play along. Jamie's growing frustration as he recognized that this wasn't going to be the friendly conversation he'd been promised. The audience's reaction, shifting from uncomfortable silence to open support for Jamie. It was a masterclass in how not to conduct an interview and how to maintain dignity under pressure. Bill demonstrated every mistake a host can make, every way to alienate a guest and lose an audience. Jamie demonstrated grace, clarity, and strength. He didn't lose his temper, didn't resort to personal attacks, didn't stoop to Bill's level. He simply stated his boundaries, explained why they'd been crossed, and left. The impact of that decision rippled outward immediately. Audience members left talking about it. Crew members who'd worked on the show for years were shaken by what they'd witnessed. And as clips started circulating, as the story started spreading, it became clear that this wasn't just another talk show controversy. This was a defining moment, both for the people involved and for the broader conversation about how we treat each other, especially in professional settings with power imbalances. Jamie Foxx had walked onto that stage as a guest. He'd walked off as something more, a symbol of self-respect in the face of disrespect, a reminder that no one has to tolerate being treated poorly, no matter how big the platform or how bright the lights, and that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply walk away.